So let's set the scene by talking about the 2025 investment landscape. I might just start with some comments on my own local market and then throw to our expert panel here for their macro insights. So many of our clients at IR Department, an investor relations firm, are listed on the ASX, and about 65% of our client base is in healthcare with a bias towards biotechnology. The end game is often partnering with big pharma and or M&A, which can bring with it a really big payday when all goes in the right direction. And we have some terrific examples of this, but it usually takes time and capital to get there. So after what's been described as a very tough market for maybe 18 months, activity for raisings on the listed market through the last quarter on the ASX really started to pick up. And in the last month, it's been described as a hot market, not just open, but hot. Not hot for IPOs just yet, but really hot for secondary raises, and the mood is buoyant. Angus Walker, as a global equity investor and an Australian operating out of Hong Kong, can you bridge us out of ASX with some views on how you're seeing the market here and perhaps further afield? Also, since we're talking about biotech, can you please address the question, is this a moment in the sun for biotechnology investing?
Yeah, sure. And I'd probably qualify everything, saying I'm the least qualified and on the rest of the panel to talk specifically, because I'm a generalist investor. So that's an important caveat to everything. How we look at everything, and our fund is actually called Pendulum for this reason, that the market never corrects to the center from one extreme. It really swings from very optimistic to very pessimistic. I think biotech and healthcare generally has actually been on 4 or 5 years of kind of deep pain, especially coming out of COVID, where there was a lot of sugar hits and certain niche technologies coming out, like mRNA had its day in the sun. That now is very early, coming off a very tough winter. So I still think it's extremely early. I know the ASX hasn't yet started to see the IPO market rear up, but certainly in Hong Kong, the flood of biotechs that have been waiting to get listed are now coming through, and the performance of those has been super well received. So we'd be running very much early into this. I think there's a lot of commodity companies here as well. They're probably already seen the last 12, 18 months of that enjoyment, and I think biotech's really now just entering for the first time.
That's very encouraging. Charles Hu, you wear a number of important hats. You're an investor. You build partnerships across academia, venture and business, and you're also running a startup. In our prep discussion, you highlighted optimism that things were starting to look fairly good and buoyant here, led with US sentiment. Could you add your macro perspectives and perhaps then just zoom in on some of the initiatives here in Hong Kong and mainland China designed to support bringing new drugs and devices to market?
Yeah, I'm generally very optimistic about the sector. I think, as I've mentioned, the U.S. has shown a very strong return to this sector, and that is evident by the number of deals happening, the number of mergers and acquisitions happening this year. I think dev stage deals have risen by about 40% this year. So far in this first half of the year. And so it's looking good, and that's mostly driven by positive clinical trial data, a regulatory landscape that is continuously evolving and supporting more innovations and better patient access. And companies we see are coming up with a lot of great ideas. I'm very confident that in this side of the world, in Asia, is going to be playing a crucial role in the global scene, right? So we've seen a lot of policies by China and by Hong Kong as well to support these kinds of cross-border partnerships and strategies. And just to name a couple, for example, Hong Kong, it has shifted from a two-body approval system to what we now call a 1+ system, whereby a company having one regulatory approval by an accredited authority outside of Hong Kong or Hong Kong can sorry, one approval body outside of Hong Kong can register in Hong Kong with supplementary evidence showing that the drug works in the local kind of demographic, right? And then on top of that, with the Hong Kong approval, with the Greater Bay Area Connect policy or scheme, you can actually take that drug or device and use it in the Greater Bay Area to gather real-world evidence without having to go through the lengthy NMPA drug approval, the whole shebang, right? So I think this provides a really good opportunities for both sides, for Hong Kong, for Chinese or Asian companies to expand globally, but also for companies outside to come into China and gather new real-world evidence in China to use that for an eventual drug approval, right? I can go more into details later. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you. And some important initiatives that you've mentioned there. Dr. Bettina Ernst, like Charles, you've had a very broad career. You founded 2 companies as a biotech entrepreneur and have been investing in the space for over a decade. In a great example of just how global biotech can be, you're based in Switzerland, investing in earlier stage companies to collaborate internationally and including into Hong Kong and China. Could you share your views on how the market has been, particularly for earlier stage companies, through 2025?
Yes, indeed. The past couple of years have been very challenging for early stage companies. There was very little cash that was invested in this space, particularly also because there were so many cheap, relatively low priced opportunities for late stage companies, and even the money that was supposed to go to early stage companies went to these attractive opportunities that were later stage. And so the early stage companies, what they were doing, they were just all trying to get as much public funding as possible. There was one bridge round after the other, or one convertible note after the other convertible note. And then, of course, there was also much earlier partnering deals with pharma happening, even if the most value-creating milestone hasn't occurred yet. And pharma could also, of course, gather these attractive early stage, low price deals. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Yes, interesting opportunity for pharma, certainly in the last 24 to 36 months, I'd say. Okay, Paul Rennie, as founder and chair of Paradigm, you have a phase 3 asset, which we'll hear about later this morning, IPPS, that you're investigating in osteoarthritis. You also have a lot of experience raising money through the journey of Paradigm over the last 11 years. And before that, you had some senior roles with Mesoblast, which is another well-known Australian company. At Paradigm, you have an active Asian capital market strategy. Could you start by giving us some background on Paradigm and your experience of raising capital generally, but particularly also in Asia? And I know you're also thinking globally with regards to partnering for your asset. So any views you could provide on how to ideally construct a very good commercial outcome in that regard?
Thanks, Jan. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So I might just start with saying that, yes, Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals listed on the ASX back in 2015. Since that time, we've been undertaking the clinical development of the compound IPPS for a number of different indications, but we've now narrowed our focus to a phase 3 program in osteoarthritis. So we currently have 50 sites in the United States and around 15 sites in Australia, and we are looking to expand on those number of sites, particularly with a site here in Hong Kong and also some sites in Europe. But we haven't announced and formally entered into those agreements just yet, but it is progressing, and it looks like we will have a centre here in Hong Kong, which is very exciting. We have raised over the journey between 3 and 400 million Australian dollars. So to undertake clinical development, it's obviously a very expensive process. So during that time, we have spent those funds on multiple phase 2 studies, and that's something that's very passionate for me, and I think it's very important from investment point of view, is to make sure that your phase 2 studies go beyond one phase 2. Multiple phase 2s gives the company and investors some degree of confidence to know that there are lessons learned in each phase 2, and you take those lessons and you test them again in phase 2, which is what we've done, and we've got to an optimal protocol that we think will be successful in phase 3. But we have seen a number of companies who've done a phase 2 study, they go straight into phase 3, and then they observe changes from the phase 2 data to phase 3, and often not successful. So I think it's very important, and that's why we've taken a longer term view on this and raised the money to be able to, sit here today and say that we have done 4 phase 2 studies, each study providing additional information and clarity around what we want in our phase 3 program. So we have been, 10 years, over $300 billion, as I said, but we also continue to work on, in the background, other studies that are required by the agencies, which will ultimately be required before you file your NDA. So I think it's important to always have some cash allocated to those studies that will be required. We know what they are, but to do them while you're doing your phase 2 studies. So when you get through your phase 3, your NDA dossier is complete. You don't want to go all of that way and get to NDA and the agency then say, but you haven't done an ADME, you haven't done carcinogenicity, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. So unless you're doing that as you go, you could face a lengthy delay with your NDA. So just a few tips there. But I think we've always seen Asia as a very important part of our funding strategy. I know it's a very generalised comment, but I think compared to Australian investors, the Asian investors have a longer term view, and they also look to the major outcomes that the company's trying to achieve, like what are the major inflection points, and make investment decisions that can be in the stock for 4, 5, 6 years. And that's what we found. I think a lot of Australian investors are, because of their familiarity with resources, expecting to see sharp spikes in the share price, get in, get out type of thing, and don't necessarily have the patience that's required for a full-blown clinical development program in biotech.
Great. Okay. Thank you for those comments. For the next couple of questions, I'd love the whole panel to chime in. So everyone will get a moment to say something, but please, if you hear something that you want to comment on, please, let's be fluid. Might start with you though, Angus. Let's move to key investment decision-making parameters. So when you're evaluating whether or not to invest in a company, do you have a top 3? What might they be?
Yeah, it's probably, especially as healthcare and in the clinic, everything, I guess, at the clinical stage or especially preclinical looks impressive. By the time it gets to me, there's already great data. So, you can't really filter on the science. And as a generalist, key for me is going to be people. So that will be my thing. And then the 2 reasons I think why that's so important and those people is firstly the scientific validation. So actually having people that we can leverage in any given sector that I think really, inform our view, that give us the confidence. So we do open-handedly, piggyback on the science because we, are very conscious of knowing what we don't know. The other is then just, ultimately, humanity ruins most businesses rather than the science. So, everything, unlike, say, a great resource in the ground where you just keep drilling and it will reveal itself, I think poorly planned, exactly to the points just discussed, trial designs, actually having a funding overlap which marries not just to the points of where the cash is going out, but the points where the cash can be raised. There's a real science to raising when you can, not when you need. And, everyone's been through those cycles. We joke often, even today, that, if you miss it once, you probably get a second chance, because these errors do pop up time and time again. And, even talking with, one of the CEOs here earlier this week, it's the constant reminder that you've probably got a 3% chance coming out of the clinic just will always humble you.
Yeah. And just to go back to your earlier point, you talked about piggybacking on the science. How do you go about that?
It's a big part of actually how the deal flow comes to us as well. That by being plugged into as much as coming to the meeting the companies here first up, I think talking to CEOs would have its obvious issues of conflicts of interest. So actually just being plugged into more general networks of biotechs, and where a company and narrative, especially where the entry point does look compelling from a risk reward perspective, being able to dig out people that are objective outside the room in those pieces is very crucial for us. We're very much incentive and outcome focused.
Got it. Bettina, do you have a top three?
Yes, absolutely. I think particularly for early stage company, I think the team is the most important matter. And second, it's the strength of the science, or the differentiation factor of the science, technology, IP. And third, of course, the unmet medical need and market opportunity.
Okay. And just on things like IP, back to Angus's point, do you have a kind of network that you tap in to understand and evaluate IP?
Absolutely. Usually, I also try to, very important, where is the IP coming from? In which lab is it evolved? People in that sector, and IP, the strength of it and how it is structured, and not just the IP itself, but the IP strategy long term.
Got it. Charles?
I would echo Gus and Bettina's sentiment on the team. I think management and execution is probably my top priority. Unfortunately, I've worked with founders who have such a big ego that they think they know better than anyone else. They think they know more than you, and it's incredibly difficult to work with. And Joe in the audience knows best. I've worked with one founder. I've had to fire one founder.
Right.
For really just having such a narrow mind, and not being adaptable. So the second thing that I hold dearly to is adaptability, right? Things are always changing, especially now with the geopolitical tensions and the regulatory landscape changing. I think companies, there's no best way of doing things, right? And you've got to get with the times and understand how to navigate the current landscape. And lastly, I would think, personally, I invest on impact. So I'd want to see it. I think because the science will prove itself in the clinical validations that you conduct. So I'm a scientist myself, so I guess I worry less about the scientific validity, but more so, is this technology going to address a critical unmet need? Is it, is it practical enough that once it gets into the market, it can actually benefit people in a significant way, right? So I look for impact.
Excellent. So we're all aligned on team being important. I like that point around adaptability as well. And I wonder how you go into an investment pinpointing whether the person that you're investing in is likely to be in that adaptable basket or not.
Yeah, I never invest in anyone in the first 6 months of getting to know them.
Okay.
So I build a relationship with them, I converse with them, and I get to know the team, right? You can pretty early on figure out whether these founders will listen to external advice, recognize their own weaknesses, and double down on their strengths, right? So through these conversations, if they are amenable to other ideas. So that's how I would go about it.
I was talking with somebody earlier who said a great way to really understand what somebody's made of is take them out to a cafe and sort of see how they treat the people around them, because it's slightly different bent on what you're saying, but you get to really understand who the person is and how they're treating the people that are there to look after them. So Paul, slightly different slant for you on this one because you're on the company side more so, but perhaps you could share the best piece of advice that you've been given by investors that has helped in shaping your corporate strategy or the way that you approach your, go-to-market communications, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So I want to come back on the point that was made in relation to the science. And so as a company, we think the way that we can help our investors and tell our investors, we publish our data. And I think that's very, very important that, sometimes companies become very product centric and say, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And that's biased. And it's also, basically unvalidated. Whereas I think from an investor's point of view, they should be asking, and certainly as a company point of view, we offer published manuscripts to say that this has been vetted, the data's been checked by external people, and you've got some form of external validation. So I think that's something that we present to our investors to say, look for the published papers. In terms of best advice, I think is to be humble and be open to new ideas, but talk to investors. Don't just sit in your office and hope that the share price is going to go up. It won't. Mm. So I think we have to understand that, as leaders of the company, you need to communicate with your staff and make sure that they're all on the same vision. And then you also need to ensure that investors understand what your vision is, what your challenges are, what your delays are, and be honest and open with the investors where you can. So that's probably the best advice I've had. Be humble, be prepared to listen, take the feedback. Sometimes the feedback is pretty brutal, but you take it and you see if you can, accommodate that feedback and, just listen to investors.
And have you had any examples that you feel comfortable talking about where you've done that? Maybe you've had a hairy moment or something and you've received a piece of feedback that's reshaped the way that you're doing something?
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. I think the most recent example is, and probably a lot of investors share this, as a public listed company, a lot of investors are concerned about dilution. So as you take on more capital, you're diluting existing investors. So we had an AGM 2024, November 2024, and some of the shareholders made it very clear that we don't want to see you doing repeated equity investments. There are other ways of raising capital and be open to those. And so we were open to that. We looked at a number of different structures, noting that we had a relatively short-term funding gap until we knew that we were going to receive some additional funding. So that short-term funding gap could have been resolved through a number of different ways. One of them was a convertible note, short-term funding to get you through the next few months, whatever. So I think that's a very classic example of, if you're not out talking to shareholders and they're not making their concerns about dilution in their investment, we probably would have done an equity raise and, not had that long-term support of our shareholders because they would see, well, we're raising this as an issue, you're not listening, we're not being heard, and therefore, vote with their feet.
That's a great example. Thank you. And I think, by the way, AGMs present a huge opportunity for listed companies to engage with their shareholders and kind of understand what their hot buttons and issues are. And if we have any companies in the audience, I'd be recommending that rather than just turning up on the day. Okay, let's switch gears. We're going to turn to one of our topics was the subsectors attracting the hot money. Or the smart money, and smart money rather than hot money. Sorry. I'd love to hear a few tips from you guys. Ideally, things that people can think about adding to their watch lists or look at. So Angus, where are you seeing opportunity at a subsector level? And can you name 2 to 3 stocks that you like at the moment and tell us why?
Yeah, this is definitely the fun part, talking your book.
Agreed. Go for it.
Generally at this base, everything's been relatively hard hit. Most things appear to be doing well. There's been a bit of a perfect storm in some instances where some companies already at the revenue stage in biotech and healthcare, whether it's medical devices and instruments, been heavily impacted by the FDA and these pauses in government spending and things like this. So these kind of pieces of, I guess, the sector have really missed out. I think if you look at actually how there's been a huge shift in the last 3 to 5 years of how big pharma now invest and what they've done with their R&D efforts, and that's really just to pull back. They really see themselves as acquiring best in class. They're happy to pay above, but investors and their own multiples depend on future growth and exciting drugs, but they're not doing that research themselves. So the opportunity now for I think companies with great science and coming after either combination therapies that are complementary to the big pharma drugs. These are really interesting and exciting spaces. A great friend of mine in New York runs a M&A specialist biotech fund. He's now 11 out of 14 of the biggest M&A deals this year in New York, and he's got a great understanding of marrying actually what big pharma is looking for and at the right time, because I think actually timing's everything in this space, because you're often left holding the bag if you don't understand that. And a few tips. I don't think it's fair just to give you ones that have worked in hindsight. One of those, about 12 months ago, we were helped restructure a business, Island Pharmaceuticals, with a few other investors that are here today. That was a pretty scorched earth. Every incremental seller had been and gone. That's really where we like to enter, where protecting our downside and being the thinking of not losing dollars first, but ultimately a very compelling dengue fever drug. Also turning it from a single asset company into a multi-asset company. We completed an acquisition this year for a second drug. Again, an incentive mechanism where a large biotech exiting a whole viral disease unit sold this second drug for less than $500,000. Today, looks like that drug in itself with the priority review voucher could be coming into something like $150 million US as a one-off sugar hit, but equally a recurring revenue stream on the back of that. All while that primary drug is still being developed, but probably has a longer lead time. And a more recent investment, which we're in, but hasn't yet, in our view, moved at all, or it hasn't. It's trading at par. Curvebeam, it was a medical device company. The shortest version is that they do MRI scans, but for weight bearing. So things like ankle, knee, and hip aren't too interesting in the MRIs. If you're lying flat with no weight on it, you really need to have a look at actually what the joint looks like under the full body weight. They've really struggled since they listed at 40 cents, and we recently recapped them effectively at 9 cents. They have executed slowly. They've been selling. The product works. They've been waiting on some FDA approvals. Actually, if you go into the recent capital raise presentation, there's a very important slide which alludes just enough that you can actually deduct that they're very close to signing some meaningful Chinese distribution. There'd be some significant capital that would come into that, and just by backing out the percentage that they're giving up for the dollars, that would be at many multiples of today's price. And we feel that that's in weeks, not months away. So that's an exciting one to put on the watch list.
So let's just get those tickers down. Island's ILA.
ILA.
I know that one very well. I'm also a shareholder.
CVB as well. Island's got a fantastic catalyst in November with an FDA meeting too. So this is a stock, as we kind of earlier discussed, feels like it's 5 to 10 times of upside as well. And that's you shouldn't really be looking at biotech with anything less than that, because you got to get paid when you're right, and you can lose a lot when you're not. So and CVB for Curvebeam.
Okay, good sound bites. Thank you, Bettina.
Yes, since I'm more specialized in the early stage private sector, I'm speaking about this sector. I think also here are many different opportunities, especially because the valuation of the companies haven't been really raising over the past 3-4 years, even if the companies have provided extremely value creation milestones over the time. But when you look at the share price that you can invest is the same as 3 years ago. And I think these are extremely attractive opportunities. And again, this then takes money from the very early stage, because even this one, the progressed are highly attractive in a valuation perspective. And then if we speak more about the modality of companies, I think I'm very keen on the non-coding RNA space. I think this is an emerging technology, and what you can see with the modality that has very low cost of goods, so potentially you can have a huge upside profit margin in these drugs, and these are very cell-specific, disease-specific. You can target indication like that, so a relatively low safety issue if it is proven safe in the clinic. This needs to be demonstrated, but I think if the potential holds true, I think this will be an incredible space.
Thank you. Excellent. And I know that you like early stage investing as a subsector we discussed the other day as well.
Yeah.
So if there are any early stage investors in the audience, speak with Bettina, because she's doing some really interesting work in the space. Charles, so subsectors and tips?
Sure. I'm also in the early stage subsector, so to speak. But the spaces that I'm really interested in is, first of all, the regenerative medicine space, which, in a nutshell, is essentially empowering your own body to either fix itself or support things that support your body in becoming the best version it can be, right? The other thing that I'm really interested in is a certain application of AI. So, in AI for healthcare and medicine, we've been seeing a lot of technologies that just makes things faster and more efficient, just streamlining things. However, I think it's a dime a dozen right now. But I'm really interested in the AI applications that really addresses some critical unmet needs. Some things that us humans, some things that you can't just do it with more people or more time and money thrown at it, right? Something that humans couldn't really do ourselves right now, that computers can. I think that's something that's really worth looking into. And there's already a few examples of that. And lastly, I think, being in Hong Kong and being a strategic nexus of East meets West, I'm very interested in how we can look at East meets West technologies, looking at how we can look at traditional Chinese medicine with a Western lens, how we can do both Western medicine and Chinese medicine integrated approaches. I think those would be kind of interesting to see. So, if I look a little bit further and look at kind of what are the promising companies out of this region that encompasses these kind of few ideas, I've been looking at B1, or formerly Beijing, Wuxi Group as well. These are companies that are, very prolific in kind of expanding their portfolios. Traditional biopharma companies are facing patent cliffs. Everyone is facing patent cliffs nowadays, and so people are looking to acquire new technologies to expand their capabilities. And I think these two companies are doing just that. And if you look around, and you see that one of the event partners for Ignite this time is the Hong Kong Life Science Investments Association, and we're doing just that. We're focusing on looking at companies that is ahead of the curve and really have a vision for what's to come. And so I'd be happy to talk to people if they want to know more about this newly formed association.
Terrific. That's great. Thank you. And so lots of interesting aspects there to consider. Two tips, Wuxi and Beijing, or which is now Beijing's
B1.
B1. This East meets West concept. Are you seeing many companies that are actually working in that space at the moment? I agree with you. I've got lots of time for that. I think we've got so many years now of kind of collective insight around how to integrate medicine to do a better job for people. Are you seeing a lot coming through locally in that space?
Yeah, I mean, for one, Yunnan Baiyao is one of the kind of an old household name that's been around for generations, but they are one that is kind of shooting out of the gate and kind of embracing this East meets West concept. There are many others as well.
Great, thank you. Paul, actually, come back to you, audience. I'm putting you guys on notice because we will open up to Q&A shortly. So if you've got any questions, please keep them, get them ready. But Paul, we might wind up this part with a final question for you, which is, what would you say to investors considering dipping their toe into the water with biotech? We might have some here for resources or tech, but, and how should they think about balancing the risk-reward ratio?
Yes, that's a great question, Jane. And don't ask me about resources. I unfortunately have never been to a coal mine or gold mine or anything like that, so I know zip in relation to resources. But in relation to biotech, I think there's some fundamentals. First of all, I mean, a lot of people within the company that have a science background do become very focused on the science. And I think what you need to do is get beyond that and say, if this gets to market, is it actually going to be another one of a class of drug doing much the same thing and therefore not be really special in terms of revenue? But is this drug really and truly going to meet a unmet medical need? And if that's the case, then I think that is worth following. I think, as has been discussed before, the management and the management experience is very important. Can they actually execute and see their way through a number of what will be challenges as you're moving from phase 2 to phase 3 and so on? But that's what I would primarily be looking at is, with all this work, all this investment, are you going to have a very attractive product at the end of the program? The other advice would be for investors to understand that investing in programs that are going through, in vitro testing, whatever you see in the laboratory could be interesting, but the ultimate test is what happens when you put it into a human, and that has to be a very important consideration. If you are putting it into a human, you have again, another thing to be considered is many years of waiting for results. It's not going to be a 5-minute job. You're not going to just, start doing a phase 2 study and get results within 5 minutes. There's going to be, depending upon the indication, particularly with chronic diseases, there's going to be long-term follow-up, and that could push the date of seeing actual clinical data out by years. So be aware that it is a long journey, it is a costly journey, but look for the right management who've executed in the past. Make sure that the end game is going to address a real need and be accepted by the physicians in the market when it gets to market, not just it's a great scientific concept. Great scientific concepts don't win at the end of the day. It's actually a product that helps patients that wins at the end of the day.
Some really excellent points there, and promise we'll throw the floor open in a minute, but one last one for you just off the back of that. So where you talk about make sure there's going to be interest at the other end, I'd love to hear any views from you on how you go about that. Is it primary research, or is it, what do you need to do to understand that answer? And also on the partnering side, so if you're talking to Big Pharma about the drug, who's probably going to be your ultimate customer, how do you construct your program around that so that they get what they need to see to de-risk it as well?
Yeah, great question, Jane. And again, come back to the fact that be open and listen and talk. So talk to commercial companies, and very often commercial companies will give you the key that will make this product successful. So, for example, in osteoarthritis, there's very few drugs that have sustained efficacy over more than a month. So what a lot of the pharma companies will do will say, if you can show efficacy out for 3 months, that will be a blockbuster. So they actually help guide you in terms of your design. And then we actually took that advice. And our last phase 2 study, we looked at the symptomatic relief, clinical outcomes for our drug at 12 months, because they said that if you can go beyond 6 months, you're going to have a really special product. So again, engage with the pharma companies early, talk to them about what they're seeing in the market, what are they telling you, what is going to be successful. Take all of that on board. There's lots of market research around, but I think the best is talking to the best-in-class pharma companies that will guide you very, very clearly to what you should be looking for in your trial design.
And any investors want to jump in and add to that point from Paul?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think great points, Paul. I think being open and humble is super important. And in view of the changing regulatory landscapes, I think the FDA is undergoing a lot of changes, and they've advocated for alternate approaches to preclinical validation, and generally trying to streamline the process so that we can conduct human trials as efficiently and meaningful as possible, right? So companies that recognize this, and I talked about adaptability earlier on, and this is part of it, recognizing that the old ways of spending $2 billion and 15 years of drug development and all these animal testing is not the new way anymore. And so companies that explore more progressive ways to develop their product is sure to be a cut above the others.
Yes, and I think in general in development, I think it's very important to have the end in mind. So what is really makes a difference for the patient, and try to have this, what makes a difference for the patient as early as an endpoint in your clinical trial, if possible, even in phase 1, to have an indication, because this at the end will be important for your reimbursement and to get your reimbursement code. And only then, if you can show this to pharma or to VCs, you have then also a market, your direct market, because they have the patient, they have the insurance, and the insurance has the patient.
Got it.
Mine's probably less insightful, but just, we always think of ourselves even one step further than the patient and the insurance company. What do you sell? There's no more actuaries in a business than probably insurance, and modeling those curves and understanding ROI on the, cost versus treatment. They're a really, really great place to think what problem are you solving in the, it's the more cynical money perspective, but it is, a huge driver.
We've got time for one quick question, I think. Anyone in the audience got it? Brian?
Thank you. Can I just ask the panel, with the Trump administration's, bringing in tariffs, messing around with the FDA, and I guess sort of generally changing the pricing models for pharmaceuticals, is that influencing the type of biotechs that you guys are looking at investing in, or even different regions that you may be investing in?
Yeah, happy to take a first crack. I think some of these things are temporary. There's just been pauses of spend, and that will return. Research universities and negotiating on funding and things like that will return. And as I think I touched on, scientific instruments have seen a huge short-term impact. That is the short term, which will correct itself. There's other structural changes which I think nobody here would deny needed to be made, where again incentive mechanisms haven't been aligned to patient outcomes or budgets or anything like this. So, I think some of those ones, especially where, in one, we own a Aussie listed burns and wounds company. They are a synthetic. They compete against biologics. The biologics, animal-based products, obviously are much more expensive. The FDA has come in with a cap on the per square inch or per square centimetre amount that they will reimburse for that. That's really undercut them, and that's here to stay. And actually, surgeon outcomes and surgeon incentives don't always marry to patients as well. If a surgery moves from a $10,000 one-off surgery to 3 times surgery to a one and done 5, actually that can be really crippling short term to the business. So understanding that, this is where the regulators probably needed to step in and make those changes. And so, it would be, as a taxpayer, I'm very supportive of that kind of change.
We've just ticked over time, so we might unfortunately need to wrap it up there. Thank you to all of you guys for being here to listen, and please join me in thanking our panelists with their expert views.